I was the first child in the family born after Jack died. He died April 14th, 1945, and I was born May 28th, 1947. I wasn't a witness to that day, but that day they had the grief any parents would have, which is incredible, tremendous grief when you hear your son is killed. In so many ways, you can understand this. But from what I hear, their guilt was doubled because they felt like they almost killed him. They felt like by the fact that they didn't let him go to school and do what he wanted to do, that he had this act of rebellion by enlisting, caused by them. So they added to their grief, they had enormous guilt. And that just put them under. In fact, it was the final straw to my grandmother's illness, and she went straight downhill after that and died. One of the big stories in here, I think, is the immigrant experience. And I think it's the story of becoming an American. The immigrant experience started with my grandparents, and they came to this country with old values, but sound values, but still of the old world. And I'm almost thinking it takes a generation to assimilate or throw off the shackles that you came with. And Jack was the first one to kind of break with that. And then, you know, the story is an immigrant family comes here and then sacrifices their only son to the cause of freedom. So it's quite a serious story.
July 19, 1910 dawned a beautiful summer day in New York City. The SS Burma, a 415-foot ship, was due into port carrying 900 passengers from Libau, Russia. Almost all were traveling third class, steerage passengers. They were hoping for a new life in America. Solomon Pear must have stood on deck with his fellow passengers, marveling at the sights, the harbor, the Statue of Liberty, and the immense city skyline. Solomon was 29 years old. He had $28 in his pocket when he arrived. He was a man with ambition, born in Breslau, Poland, and well educated in the yeshiva of his Jewish heritage. After completing his education, he had moved to WWII, Russia, and married Eska Markman. On this day, his one goal was to establish a new home and earn enough money to send back to the shtetl for his wife and his 3 daughters. Many from WWII had come before him and had settled in Brooklyn, in a new area on the eastern edge called Brownsville. His heart must have been in his throat as he entered the main hall at the Ellis Island Immigration Station. So far in 1910, almost 10,000 immigrants had been denied entry and sent back to their homelands. But hundreds of thousands had been permitted to move beyond Ellis Island into the new promised land called the United States. Solomon was young and willing to work wherever he could. Like so many of his Russian Jewish countrymen, he started peddling on the streets of Brownsville. His specialty quickly became brooms and brushes because everyone needed them to keep their tiny apartments clean. While Solomon must have been achingly lonely, he found comfort in his synagogue and local Landsmannschaften, a mutual aid society formed by people who had come before him from WWII. Solomon worked hard, and after 3 years he was able to send enough money back to his family so that they could join him. His wife, their 3 young daughters, Hannah, Lily, and Libby, and his wife's father, Lieb Markman, would make the crossing to America together. More than 80 years later, at her 90th birthday celebration, Solomon and Eska's second daughter, Lily, recalled that journey and the family's early years in Brooklyn.
before we left Russia to come to America, almost at the end of 1913, that we went all around to all the relatives to say goodbye to everyone. And then we went to Hamburg. I remember that we had to wait a couple of months in Hamburg until, my mother's eyes were clear. I don't know what was wrong with her eyes. It was sort of like she had pink eye. But if they detected an eye problem when you were at Ellis Island, they made you go back. But my mother, she was so smart. She decided to go to Philadelphia, which wasn't as strict about medical things as they were at Ellis Island. I remember the trip took forever and it was very stormy. Then we took the train from Philadelphia to Brooklyn, where my father was. He met us at the train station and took us to his apartment, which was a one-bedroom at the back of a store. I think it was on Williams Avenue. We lived in this small store for a long time. But my mother, she was way too proud for that. She wanted a real store. The big store was on the corner of Blake and Alabama. So we got a 2-bedroom apartment and the store. And she started taking in not just brooms and brushes, but she had the oilcloth that you put on shelves first, and then later she got some little rugs, and then she sold floor coverings. My mother spoke Jewish. She talked to us with broken English because we forced her to, but she took all her business things written in Jewish. My brother Jack was born in 1917. 2 years later, Mary was born. Jack was my mother's pride and joy. 4 girls and 1 boy. Jack and Mary were really brought up by me. I was the one who always had the burden of Mary and Jack. When Jack was little, maybe 9 or 10, he had a dog. He loved that dog more than anything in the world. Well, one day I came home and there was the dog. It was run over. I didn't know what to do, I didn't have money to buy him another dog. But I bought him something else. I bought him a typewriter. It was a second-hand typewriter. I bought him the old typewriter and he started writing. Oh, the things he wrote. He was the editor-in-chief of the school paper. Jack was a real Renaissance man now that I look back upon all of it. He was not only good in school, he was a natural athlete. It didn't matter what the sport was. It could have been baseball or football or hunting or fishing. He did them all. He even taught himself how to box, so he wouldn't be the only skinny Jewish kid from Brooklyn. Somehow, I don't even remember, he learned to ski, and he loved it. After Jack graduated from high school, and he got really good grades, he wanted to be a journalist. He was even accepted at Columbia, but my mother and father, they wouldn't pay his tuition. They wanted him to work in the store. They wanted him to take it over. But Jack didn't want that. Jack wanted bigger things, but he was a good son. He worked in the store for 6 years, but he would never, ever work inside selling. He drove the delivery truck, or he installed the flooring. He couldn't stand to be cooped up like that. He was really restless. Jack was one of those people, everybody really liked him. He was funny. I think it was 1941. The war was coming. Now, Jack, he tried to join the Marines, but they wouldn't take him. I don't know why. And he tried again, and then he joined the Army. I think it was October 1941. He never, ever asked my mother and father. He just did it on his own. He needed to get away and have his own life, and this was the only way he could see to do it. My parents, they were very angry with him. What could they do? He had already signed up. Jack used to write us. He used to write home. He didn't write to my mother because she couldn't read English, so he wrote to me, or he wrote to Libby or Mary, sometimes Hannah. We would read the letters to my mother. The postman knew he shouldn't deliver them to my mother, even if they were addressed to our parents. We lived next door, and he knew we'd have to read them, so he delivered them to our house.
General George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, decided to form the nation's first winter warfare unit in November of 1941. The regiment, with a planned strength of 2,000 men, was designated the 87th Mountain Infantry. It was initially located at the large Army base at Fort Lewis, Washington. Within a year, the 87th would have its own unique military training installation in Colorado. The Army decided early that it would be better to recruit men who knew how to ski and train them to be soldiers, rather than to find soldiers and train them how to ski. Many of the initial members of the 87th Mountain Infantry Regiment came from collegiate ski teams and outing clubs. Ski instructors, including those forced out of Europe by hostilities, also enlisted to help train the fledgling unit. The regiment began to come up to strength during the winter and spring of 1942. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, and the United States was thrust into the global war. The decision to form the Mountain Infantry seemed to have come none too soon. But how, where, and when these troops would be used was still an open question. Jack enlisted in the Army in October of 1941. He was sent to Fort Gordon, near Augusta, Georgia, for basic training. While there, Jack learned of the just-forming 87th Mountain Infantry and requested a transfer into the new unit. What could be better than skiing as part of his Army service? He produced the required affidavits from friends that said he knew how to ski, and his transfer was granted. In the summer of 1942, Jack, a Jewish skier from Brooklyn, found himself on a train crossing the country from Georgia to Washington to join his new unit at Fort Lewis. Jack would be one of the very early members of what grew to become the famous 10th Mountain Division. Like so many servicemen, Jack wrote home to his family to share his experiences. Thanks to his sister Lily, most of these letters survived. Jack was also a passionate amateur photographer. The hundreds of pictures he took, in both black and white and color, were also preserved by Lily. This is just one story of the 10th Mountain Division as told through the letters and pictures of one enlisted man. Every man in the 10th Mountain had a unique story. Their story, so many of which remained untold, can be better understood through the words and pictures of Jack Pear. When Jack arrived at Fort Lewis in the summer of 1942, he was assigned to Company C of the 87th Mountain Infantry. He would stay in that unit for the duration of the war. Jack discovered that unlike the mechanized army he had left in Georgia, the mountain troops depended on mules for transporting their heavy equipment and supplies. Trucks and armored vehicles couldn't operate in the steep, rugged terrain for which the 87th was being trained. A whole new cadre of men was required, besides those that knew skiing and mountaineering. Now the Army needed mule skinners, wranglers, and mountain packers for the mountain troops. The Army had no idea how to train and equip this new type of Army unit. There were no procedures or manuals to guide them. They made it up as they went along. Clothing, tents, boots, tools, skis, snowshoes, none of these had ever been created for military use. One of the first tasks of the men who joined the 87th was to test and select designs to equip the rest of the regiment. By the time Jack arrived in the summer of '42, much was already underway, but much more still needed to be done. Jack, perhaps in a moment of homesickness, wrote home to his family.
Wednesday, September 30th, 1942. Payday for the Mountain Infantry at Fort Lewis, Washington. Dear Mom and Pop, Pop, was it a year ago that we got up early that Monday morning and drove the Chevy over to the draft board at the corner of Rutland Road? Was it really that long ago that I said goodbye and sent you on your way, but you waited till I walked away and sneaked over, watching until the time I got on the train? It seems like a week ago, and it seems like ages ago, and sometimes it seems as if there were never any other life but this one. I've seen changes in this country. We were at peace when I first came in. We're at war now and we've come to realize it, although it took some time too. Also, while I was in the Army, I got a new brother-in-law, and now he's in the Army, just starting where I did a year ago. Your loving son, Jack.
Fort Lewis had been selected as the first post for the 87th because of its proximity to Mount Rainier, only 50 miles away. Jack was assigned to a weapons platoon. That meant mortars. Many hours were spent on the firing range. Many more were spent on long marches in both the cold and rain of Washington. The men became used to working with mules as transport for heavy loads, but despite having mules, the men could be expected to carry 80 to 100-pound packs on the extended marches. The men got tougher, fast. Jack rode home.
Here's more news. On or about October 15th, we're moving out of here. There'll be about a month of maneuvers in Southern California, near a town called Holon. Then we finally move out to Pando, Colorado. That's all I know about the whole thing, but it sounds as if we'll have a fine time. We're actually going to get a chance to see how good those mules are against a mechanized outfit like the one I came from in Georgia. It's not as one-sided as it sounds. Where we go, they can't follow, and we move noiselessly. I look for us to whip the pants off of them.
But like most things in the Army, plans were made to be changed, and changed again. By November, Jack was still at Fort Lewis and getting frustrated.
Thursday, November 12th, 1942. 87th Mountain Infantry Regiment, Fort Lewis, Washington. Dearly beloved, it almost never snows out here, but it's terribly damp, foggy, and quite cold mornings and evenings. There's just not much worse than a damp cold. Remember I once told you this is the rainiest part of the U.S.? That's what it does here, day after day and stop and go many times each day. It continues this way until May. So I had the heat in Georgia, the rain in Washington. Now all I need is the snow in Colorado.
Finally, on November 18, 1942, the 87th Mountain Infantry boarded troop trains and headed to Holon, California, adjacent to Fort Ord and Monterey Bay. The 87th continued to drill in the Holon area just as it had in Fort Lewis, only now the weather was drier and hotter. Everyone was waiting for the real adventure, which would start when they were sent to Colorado to newly completed Camp Hale. Finally, on New Year's Day, 1943, Jack and his fellow ski troopers arrived at the 9,200-foot-high base nestled in a mountain valley about 20 miles north of Leadville. When the 87th arrived, they filled less than a third of the space that had been built, but recruiting was well underway to form two more regiments, the 86th and the 85th. That would bring the total force to almost the full 15,000-man complement of a division. The winter of 1943 was brutal in the Colorado high country. The temperatures at night often would dip to 30 below zero. Hundreds of men suffered from frostbite and altitude sickness. But for Jack, there was a temporary reprieve. Jack had not had a furlough since the previous summer. His second furlough came through in March of 1943. He spent it back in Brooklyn with his family. But within 2 weeks, he was back at Camp Hale, picking up the grind again. He rode home as soon as he returned.
Dear folks, I was quite lucky, and in a way unlucky, to have been away at this particular time. Lucky because there was one blizzard after another here, 40 below one day, and the boys had a really tough time of it out on maneuvers, sleep out, etc. In fact, quite a few are in the hospital, plus some casualties from the Texas rookies we have who are out on skis for the first time. The men are quite miserable and generally in an ugly enough mood. There was a rush of applications for transfer to the Air Corps, parachute troops, etc., anything to get the hell out. Most of the men are terribly fed up with this place and the way things have been run around here. Although, they all put in for dangerous organizations, the only things you can transfer to these days. They were all turned down. So there's lots of ill will here and all you hear are threats, etc. May 7th, 1943. I couldn't write all week because I've been on maneuvers at Ptarmigan Pass, a wild spot some 8 miles from camp. They were really tough maneuvers, as rugged as any I've been on in the 87th, which is saying something alright. We hiked up to the pass. Weapons platoon, that's me, using snowshoes, the rest of the company on skis. Our mules came with us, but over a shorter trail where they'd have no difficulty getting through. Besides, the poor deers might be pooped following our killing pace over the back-breaking trail we had to follow. But that's the 87th for you. We pitched camp on a sunny slope where snow had melted, and for the first day it looked as if we were going to have a fine time. It was strange to see, but on our side there was no snow. It was summer. At the base of the slope ran a swift roaring mountain stream. You crossed it and it was winter, bleak and cold. Snow-covered hills rose upward as far as the eye could see, and it was here that we maneuvered every day, and some nights. The second day it snowed, and from then on it snowed day after day, till we were groggy and half-frozen, finally coming back full into the teeth of a blizzard to camp. But while on this maneuver, we'd climbed higher than ever before, touting our weapons along, proving to the satisfaction of the bigwigs that it could be done. That's what this whole maneuver has been about, to test the conditioning and endurance of the men.
Few USO entertainers came to the remote Army base tucked in the high Colorado mountains. But one thing every Army post had access to was movies. With little else to do, the men saw every movie that the Army had to offer.
Every Army post has one or more movie houses. At Fort Lewis, I didn't go to see a show in my 6 months there, too busy having real fun. In this isolated icebox, things are different. It's a case of going nuts with boredom, when you've got time to be bored, I mean, or going to the movies day after day, and going nuts anyway. That's why I almost choked when you asked if I'd seen any pictures lately. You should have worded it, are there any I haven't seen? Good, bad, or indifferent, and it's gotten so that I'm indifferent if they're bad. I've seen and suffered through them all. It's the only relaxation or escape open to a guy down here, and everybody goes.
Sometimes, however, the movies were more serious. Jack commented on one in particular, made for the U.S. government by renowned film director Frank Capra.
We here at Hale have been shown one part each week of a 7-part government film restricted for civilians entitled Why We Fight. It's excellent, the most absorbing and intelligent films I've ever seen. Too bad it can't be shown to the American people. I can't see what harm it would do. Its explanations are most coherent. But when we come out after seeing them, we want to kill, and quick. It isn't that they're atrocity films. They're not. But the very thoroughness of the Germans and the vivid portrayal of the ruthlessness and diabolically planned perfection of the German war machine makes you so mad.
But mostly, the grueling training went on and on.
Last week, in a 70-mile-an-hour blizzard atop a 13,000-foot peak, we played soldier and cursed the bastards who thought up these shenanigans. We think they're crazy. Who in hell's gonna fight battles up there when no living thing exists even under ideal conditions? Meanwhile, the pace is killing and may the strong survive. Many drop out. So many requests for overseas duty were received that headquarters issued a special bulletin stating that these requests would not only be ignored, but that they were entirely out of order. The men actually feel it would be easier on the other side. At least there they could see a reason for this terrific training. They honestly feel that actual combat conditions wouldn't subject them to such hardships as they are made to go through here. And they're convinced they'll never have to fight at heights and in places such as we maneuver in.
In June of 1942, the Japanese invaded the two most westward islands in the Aleutian island chain, Attu and Kiska. They intended to use them as forward defense posts in their control of the western Pacific. The United States feared that Japanese air bases there could threaten the West Coast. The United States Army Air Force began a relentless series of bombing attacks on Attu and Kiska, dropping 27,000 bombs on the islands from the American bases further up the chain. The plan was for the Allies to invade Kiska first, but logistical problems caused the first target to be changed to Attu. Finally, on May 11, 1943, an American force of 15,000 men landed on Attu. They were met by a well-entrenched garrison of 2,900 Japanese troops. The vicious battle to recapture Attu lasted until May 30th. Over 500 Americans died on Attu, and 2,100 more were wounded. The Japanese garrison was wiped out, with only 29 prisoners being taken. The battle to retake Kiska was expected to be far worse. The Japanese were thought to have a garrison of 9,000 men on Kiska. The Attu invasion had been poorly planned and executed. The Allies vowed that Kiska would be different. The force planned for the invasion would have both American and Canadian forces. Almost 35,000 men were to land on the island. The 87th Mountain Infantry was pulled out from the rest of the 10th Mountain Division because it was the most highly trained. It was ordered to Fort Ord, California, for amphibious landing instruction.
June 7th, 1943. Our lieutenant colonel made a brief speech Friday in which he promised us we'd be out of here soon. Most of us construed this to mean maneuvers in California. Rumor mongers lost no time, and by now the story is Alaska or Kiska. June 9th, 1943. Today orders came through to send home or get rid of all personal belongings. We're literally without equipment, stripped to the minimum. We'll leave here destination unknown. What is most probable is this. We'll go to a staging area, maybe Fort Ord, California, be re-equipped and outfitted, new clothing, weapons, etc., then to an embarkation point. Again, maybe Fort McDowell, Frisco, and swoosh! I guess you know how glad I am to get out of here at last. I'm in fine shape and brown as a berry. You know, the sun is 2 miles closer here. Love, Jack. June 11th, 1943. Last night I saw one of the worst demonstrations of drunkenness, disorganization, violence, and destructiveness I'd ever seen in soldiers anywhere. The 87th was to leave in the morning and they were getting 8 months of unremitting maneuvers and hard work off their chests. They'd been under pressure too long, and it was their release. They showed their joy at finally being released from this place, where it's no passes or place to go, no entertainment, terrible weather, and hard work all the time. But they showed it in a funny way. Liquor, usually next to impossible to smuggle into camp, suddenly was available and in large quantities. There were numerous fights, single and battle royales. Windows, mirrors, electric bulbs, in fact, anything breakable was smashed. Latrines were flooded, beds overturned, equipment thrown all over the barracks. Sleep was impossible. And by the time the last soldier had his cuts treated and settled down, it was time to get up. 4:30 a.m. It was a sorry-looking bunch that marched silently for 45 minutes to the railroad station at Pando. Just as they'd arrived, at midnight, January 1st, without fanfare at a snowbound 31 degree below Camp Hale, so they left, in a June morning rain, with no crowds, no one to see them go or bid them farewell. It was symbolic of that unhappy place. June 14th, 1943, Fort Ord, California. This camp is a veritable paradise after Hale. I guess I never dreamed that 3 years after being nixed by the Marines, I'd be getting the identical landing operations training they go through. And no Marine ever got as thorough a training as I have had in the 2 years I've been in the Army. My lieutenant's guess is that we'll stay here 2 months, maybe more or less. Everything done here, in word and deed, points to the invasion and taking of Kiska. The men have buckled down now. There's little fooling around and it's good to work with them. Besides, responsibility is good for a man. June 29th, Monday to Thursday, 1943. Went out and spent all day practicing climbing into the mock landing boats from cargo nets suspended above them, and disembarking, all on dry land. Each time we took more equipment. Friday, the big day. This time landing to onshore from real boats. We climbed down from the pier on those cargo nets, only this time, they're really boats and water below us. We crouched down into the plywood, flat-bottom landing boats painted navy gray. 36 soldiers and 3 sailors. It roars out into the bay and starts circling, waiting for the other boats to arrive. Once arrived, they form a line alongside, the distance between them determined by the amount of beach desired to be covered. Then they give them the gun, and make the run for the hostile beach at top speed, keeping abreast all the time, whether the beach be 500 or 12,000 yards away. It all requires perfect timing and control. We crouch on the boats, and suddenly are lurched forward as our boat scrapes, then hits bottom hard. At almost the same instant, the ramp drops down, and, if the tide's out or the sea's calm, start running up the beach for cover, full speed. There's something about the door dropping down that gets you. You get a fleeting glimpse of surf and sand beach, and you feel you've got to get out of the boat in a hurry to keep your health. And you're right, because for that brief moment, you're vulnerable. Seasickness, gulp, is another factor to be reckoned with. Old deep-sea fisherman that I am, I never tossed about in boats that size with flat bottoms. Oh, it's all right while the boats are underway, but when their motors are idle while they wait to assemble, they toss about like the celluloid duck in Junior's bathtub. Result, after a short while, your conversation, so animated a moment ago, gradually ceases. Your eyes glaze, take on a lackluster look. You're suddenly sweating a cold sweat, and please don't ask about how your stomach feels. By that time, you don't care if the boat gets torpedoed, bombed, sunk, or even reaches shore. You want to die quietly. July 19th, 1943. Monday morning. Aboard the USS J. Franklin Bell, off San Diego Harbor. 2 Thursdays ago, we left Ord and reached Frisco at midnight after a short train ride. From Frisco, we steamed to San Diego. From the ship, we made several practice invasion landings on nearby beaches. From here, we'll go back to Monterey, make a landing there, head back to camp. July 23rd, 1943. Well, here we are back one day, and we spent this one packing. Yep, we're going to go on another trip again. My guess is that we'll entrain or embark for a northern U.S. port, most probably Seattle. From the port of embarkation there, we'll be on our way.
The troops left Fort Ord by troop train to San Francisco, and then on to the Aleutian Islands. When the Allied invasion to recapture Kiska began on August 15th, their commanders feared that it would be a difficult and bloody campaign. But the Japanese, unbeknownst to the American Navy blockading the island, had secretly evacuated their troops from Kiska 2 weeks before the Allied invasion force arrived. When the first American and Canadian troops landed on the island and encountered no resistance, they assumed the Japanese forces were in their bunkers, high on the slopes of the rugged terrain. Allied patrols were sent out to find the enemy. What they found instead was each other. In the dense fog with confused command operations, 32 men were killed by friendly fire. 50 more were wounded. Because the invasion fleet had new orders for other Pacific assignments, the men and supporting supplies were unloaded on the island. The invasion force, including the 87th Mountain Infantry, settled in for a long 4 months of building an Allied outpost on the island. The weather was miserable when the Allies landed and got steadily worse. The men worked in deteriorating weather conditions throughout the autumn of 1943. Finally, in December, the bulk of the invasion force was withdrawn on a ragtag group of ships that had been hastily drawn together. As they withdrew from Kiska, one of Jack's close buddies, Denny Noonan, wrote home to his parents.
Did any of those pictures in Life show how we lived on Kiska? Did they show the food we ate? Did they show the boys being blown sky high by booby traps and landmines? Did the stories tell that the fog was so dense that we shot and killed our own men as they loomed out of the fog? There were no Japs there, so they don't show the graves of our boys, but I have a friend buried on Kiska. I know a boy on the bottom of the Gulf of Alaska. A booby trap threw his mind out of kilter and he jumped overboard en route home. The pictures didn't show us working night and day, in rain, fog, snow, sleet, and hail, with mud all about, unloading barges and getting the island built into another American defense post. No, you can't rely on the papers, movies, radio, etc. One has to see firsthand the horrible waste of war, the bungling, the red tape, ineffective management. One has to live the life of a ground force soldier to realize how rotten war is. And to think that I learned all this without a Jap on the island.
The men of the 87th returned to the home of the 10th Mountain Division at Camp Hale. If the weather conditions on Kiska had been lousy, the Colorado winter of 1944 would turn out to be worse. There are no surviving letters from Jack during the winter of 1943-1944. At the end of March, virtually the entire division was ordered up into the high country for weeks of maneuvers in sub-zero conditions at 12,000 feet. This was to be forever remembered as D Series. Before it was over, the maneuvers resulted in hundreds of cases of frostbite, injury, and sickness. Later reports stated that compared to any other unit in the Army during the war, the D Series resulted in over 5 times the rate of injuries and illness. The memory of the needlessly harsh weeks in the mountains was never to be forgotten. The commanding generals in the European and Pacific theaters were offered the services of the 10th, but they refused to take the division. They could not see a need for such specialized mountain forces. They especially didn't want a division that depended mainly on mules rather than trucks for transport. So the 10th Mountain Division continued to train and wait. Winter gave way to spring, and rumors began to circulate in Camp Hale that the division was to be transferred south for warm weather training at Camp Swift outside of San Antonio, Texas.
Saturday, July 1st, 1944. Camp Swift, Texas. Deep in the heart of. At 6 o'clock in the afternoon last Monday, June 26th, we marched out of Camp Hale, this time for good I hope, without fanfare and entrained. 5 minutes later we were on our way, rolling towards the Lone Star State. At noon Wednesday, sopping wet with perspiration, we arrived at Camp Swift. August 9th, 1944. Deep in the heat of. This outfit is always subject to extremes of one sort or another. On this bivouac, the heat and humidity was murderous. The sweat never ceased to drip off in your carcass. Somehow, the sight of heavy vines trailing from the trees and the men going about tanned and stripped to the waist added to the illusion of being in the jungle. And do you get dirty out here in a hurry? Insects you come to take for granted, but snakes, poisonous ones I mean, brother, put the fear of God into you. Darn those goddamn things. September 27th, 1944. Deep in the mud of. In the regiment, vast reorganization has taken place. We're getting away from the Light Division organization by War Department order, bringing up the outfit to its former strength. Now that there's a feeling that there's something in the air, morale is climbing again. November 26th, 1944. Camp Swift, Texas. We are going overseas again, and have very little time left in this country. I've been running the platoon for almost a month now. For a guy who never wanted to accept responsibility, you should see me now. We now have a new divisional commander, Brigadier General George P. Hayes, winner of the Congressional Medal of Honor from the last war, just lately recalled from Italy and France. Yesterday he spoke to the officers and non-coms of the division who gave us an opportunity to see what he looks like and hear what he had to say. And he impressed us considerably with his drive, forcefulness, and good humor. They must have a big job for us to have sent us such a top-notch man. And it's a good thing to be going over with someone you have every confidence in.
On December 29th, 1944, Jack wrote from Camp Patrick Henry, Virginia.
As you probably know by now, I shipped out of Texas, and all I'm permitted to say right now is that I'm somewhere on the East Coast. That's all. Which isn't very important anyway, because my stay here is only temporary, and I should be on my way across again in a very short time. But what I started to say was that since arriving here I phoned home twice, and it was the most gratifying to hear the folks' voices. It was almost as good as a furlough.
The 10th Mountain Division sailed from Newport News, Virginia, on January 4th, 1945, on the converted ocean liner America, now rechristened the USS West Point. The ship arrived in Naples on January 13th. The troops disembarked and immediately resumed their journey by coastal ship and truck to Livorno, on the coast near Florence. Jack wrote home.
January 24th, 1945. Somewhere in Italy. Dear folks, sorry, but this is the first chance I've had to write. The olive branch, universal symbol of peace, is in evidence everywhere, and ironically, so is the war. We can see and hear evidence of it everywhere. Suffice it to say at present that life is on the old pattern once more, strictly rugged, and I am well and in good spirits. I assure you that everything is okay, so please don't worry. We encamped for a while on what had once been King Victor Emmanuel's hunting estate and preserve. Nothing but class, but the ground was just as wet and damp. Then we moved up by motor convoy into the mountains and stayed in reserve for a while. Later we went higher up still. We're committed in a tiny frontline village where we saw some action. Incidentally, please send Aaron's address. I'd like to write to him. February 1st, 1945. Somewhere in Italy. For the second time in this lovely war, I've got my overseas appetite with me. Sempre ho fame. I'm always hungry in Italian or any other language. But that's to be expected when you're in the field anywhere, especially overseas. Your packages will be most welcome when they arrive, and all I ask is that you continue sending them. A bottle of vino and your straight from the States delicacies, and I'll be the wealthiest man in Italy since Croesus. This bartering with the Ides is always going on, cigarettes for vino, chocolate or soup for eggs, etc. But today it reached a climax. My squad and I gave some guinea kids sugar in exchange for salt. Life can get complicated, can't it? Most of the kids here are undersized, and all of them are thin from lack of food. Their clothing is almost always torn and patched and often hanging in tatters. In the often oversized cast-off clothing of others and utterly worn-out shoes which are ripped open at the toes and much too large, plus the ragged caps and streaked dirty faces, they almost resemble little clowns, and it would be funny if it weren't so tragic. Cigarettes, chewing gum, chocolats, they say, eager for almost the forgotten taste of candy or gum, and the cigarettes they can barter off for food. From what I've seen, the kids living in the country are a little better off, but not very much. This was once a beautiful country, but war has made it ugly and unhappy. Its people desperate and despairing. All the little boys tell me that it is their lifetime ambition to come to America.
The division was moving up. In early February, the 87th replaced other American units holding the Allies' already established position. Skirmishes and artillery fire kept the men on edge, but there were no major casualties. In mid-February, Jack's unit was pulled briefly off the line and sent to a village in the rear. The men had a brief time to relax.
February 14th, 1945. Somewhere in Italy. Dear folks, please don't worry when time lapses between my letters. You can be perfectly okay and in no danger whatsoever for long periods of time and still be unable to write. For instance, can you write from the back of a bouncing truck on a long trip? Can you write while hiking, or in the building of some abandoned town at night when there are no lights, and if there were lights, you'll not be permitted to use them at night anyway, for fear of enemy observation? Can you write when all you've got with you are combat necessities and all your writing essentials are packed away in some rear area? And can you write when you're as busy as a cockroach and the day is never long enough and you keep saying to yourself and anyone else within muttering distance, "Today I will wash my face, no matter what happens"? The picture of Italy is the same wherever you go. War has cut its swath, leaving its indelible mark on the countryside, cities, and people. How can a soldier eat when a hungry, half-starved ragazzo, kid, holding a tin can hovers over you, staring at your mess kit, waiting for you to finish so he can get the scrapings? I know we're not to blame, but you still feel guilty as hell. The countryside otherwise is very pretty, quaint and picturesque, to use the old, stilted phrase. In the summertime, I imagine it would be beautiful. The people are always extremely grateful and polite, eager to do your bidding, run errands, do odd jobs. Of course, we are here for a limited engagement only, you understand. You should have seen the banquet held with your first package. It arrived just prior to a troop movement and it was impossible to take it with us. In a room of an abandoned house of a frontline town, my pals Stanley Lemansky and Dinny Noonan, we three always share out food parcels, spread out a tablecloth, put out new china plates, heaped them with Melba toast, spread cheese, anchovies, boneless sardines, boned chicken, creamed turkey, topped the meal off with wine found in the cellar, coffees, and cigars. And we could hear guns firing all the time. That was our dinner music. The first time I headed for the front was better yet. I was bouncing around the back of a Jeep trailer, manning a machine gun, eating sea rations from a can and gulping wine from a canteen which kept spilling all over me. Love, Jack.
General Hayes, in assessing the situation, soon realized that one of the reasons that the Germans had been successful in retaining Mount Belvedere was that they had had artillery observers on the top of a nearby ridge of mountains to the southwest of Mount Belvedere. These observers could direct artillery fire at the American positions with great precision. Before Mount Belvedere could be taken, the German observers on the ridge had to be eliminated. The 10th was moved quietly under moonless skies into the buildings and farmhouses of Vidyachatico at the foot of Mount Belvedere. The Germans, with observation posts on the top of the nearby mountains and ridges, could easily observe any daytime activity, so the troops were brought in at night. By the middle of February, the entire division was in place in the areas to the south of Mount Belvedere. Having a fresh division in place, however, was no guarantee of success in the battle to come. Mount Belvedere had been assaulted by the U.S. Army 3 times before in the autumn of 1944, and 3 times the Germans had counterattacked and forced the Americans back off the mountain. General Hayes decided to use the best climbers of the 86th Mountain Infantry Regiment to eliminate the Germans on the nearby ridge. On February 18th, under the cover of darkness and with their weapons unloaded, so as to have no inadvertent shooting that might alert the Germans, some of the best climbers of the 86th scaled the massive stone face of the ridge at 4 positions along its length. They waited in the fog at the edge of the summit until the first light of day, and then charged forward, taking the Germans by complete surprise. This taking of the ridge would forever endure in the annals of the U.S. Army as the Battle of Riva Ridge. With Riva Ridge secured, the rest of the 10th Mountain Division began moving up into positions on the slopes of Mount Belvedere in the darkness of the evening of February 19th. The plan of attack was to take 4 mountain peaks in the chain, beginning with Mount Belvedere and sweeping through to Mount della Torraccia. While moving into position, the troops were ordered to keep their weapons unloaded, so as not to give away their movements by nervously firing their rifles. The Germans had heavily mined the slopes up the mountain, making the advance in the dark more difficult. Exploding mines alerted the Germans, and they began to shell the slopes, not being sure if these were patrols or a full assault. Forbidden to fire their rifles, the men of the 10th were to knock out German defenders with grenades, bayonets, or hand-to-hand combat. Numerous small skirmishes took out the pockets of Germans who were in place to guard the mountain and its peak. By the early morning hours, most of the American troops were in command of their assigned territories on Mount Belvedere. The main German force stationed below was unaware of the extent of the American advance. When dawn came, and the Germans discovered that it was not their own men in command of the high ground, they began a vicious counterattack to push the Americans back. The battle for the chain of mountain peaks raged on for 5 long days. By February 25th, the 10th Mountain Division had taken permanent control of the chain of 4 mountains. Almost 1,000 men of the 10th had been killed or wounded in the fighting. Shortly after the battle was over, the division was relieved on the line by other American forces, and the 10th pulled back to a rest area, giving the men time to recuperate, clean up, and right their loved ones. The men had seen intense combat for the first time, and none would ever forget it. They had lost friends and companions. They had felt the terror of war. Before the battle, they were optimistic, even a little cocky. Afterwards, the grim reality of battle was with them even when they were not on the line. Jack wrote home.
February 28th, 1945, Italy. Dear folks, again, I've just returned from 9 days at the front, and since I'm in this rest area for a very short time, this letter is all there's time for. Perhaps you've read in the papers of the taking of Mount Belvedere. My unit spearheaded the attack. Our boys were wonderful, all of them. God was with us, and we were very fortunate. Those supermen died just like anyone else, and it was something to see them getting it like the dogs they are. I saw very many who'll never try to kill American boys again for their Fuhrer. I'm writing this not to cause alarm or anxiety or frighten you, dear ones. But I know that the papers are full of casualty lists of our boys, and there is so much sadness at home, and it's often forgotten that they're getting it, and plenty too. My regiment and division did itself proud. We were most fortunate and gained much praise from the high commanders. One morning when they tried to counterattack, we shot them down like so many dogs. Thanks for your letters. It's always appreciated. Every one of them, especially since most of them have been read, reread, and reread in foxholes before they had to be burned. That's all there's time for now. Someday this will be over and it'll seem just like a bad dream. Until that wonderful day, and it isn't far off, all my love it is in my power to express to you, Mom darling, and you, Pop. Your boy knows you are praying for him all the time, and in his own crude way, prays that you are well and not being caused anxiety. You know that I'll take care of myself as long as I know that all is well at home, so please don't worry needlessly and take care of yourselves. And send me plenty of assurances that you're in good health. Good luck, and God bless you all. Love, Jack.
The Allied commanders had not expected the division to make such rapid gains after the bitter experiences of late 1944. In order to consolidate their gains further, they decided to quickly follow the Mount Belvedere-Mount della Torraccia attack with a second thrust on the next chain of mountains heading north toward the Po River Valley. The division began its second assault on March 3rd, with the objective being to take Casteldiano and Mount della Spey, some 5 miles north of Mount della Torraccia. Mount Belvedere had been taken with a surprise attack under the cover of darkness. Now that the Germans knew the 10th was facing them across the line, surprise was no longer possible, and this assault would take place in broad daylight. Allied artillery and Army Air Force bombing runs would try to soften up the enemy before the infantry attacked. The men of the 10th would have to battle their way over the many hillsides and through the tiny farming hamlets that dotted the landscape. The buildings and churches in these hamlets provided an excellent defensive position for the Germans. The artillery and Air Force would attempt to destroy the enemy waiting there before the infantry attacked. Dug deep into bunkers, the Germans were barely scathed. The attack began with the Americans moving into withering fire from the enemy. The brutal combat continued for 3 days. Jack's buddy, Denny Noonan, wrote to his parents after this assault.
War spares nothing. The isolated hamlets, with walls of stone feet thick, make fortresses for the enemy to gather strength within and strike out to kill. The village churches make ideal observation posts so the enemy can watch your every move and direct death against you. The little home with its red-tiled roof, white walls, and blue door is hiding an 88 that will blast your foxhole at night. Now, instead of rebelling within at the sight of seemingly wanton destruction, we beg the artillery and Air Corps to lay waste to even the innocent structure, even though it might be mellowed by centuries of laughter, the smoke of thousands of fiesta fires, the love of generation upon generation of family happiness. War knows no love, race, or creed, only the desire to live. Even I have begged the Air Corps to lay waste to a church steeple as the 88s were crashing too near my foxhole for comfort. So you see, Mother and Daddy, in my short time in combat, my heart is hardened and soul has grown bitter. I have killed, and I shall continue to do so without flinching until peace comes to the world of war.
3 days later, on March 5th, the 10th had taken control of their objectives for the attack. But even after they had secured Casteldiano, the German shelling continued. Denny Noonan wrote again to his parents.
Although spring is in the air and it's warmer, one finds himself still trembling like a leaf when caught in an artillery barrage. There is less ducking, however, because when you hear a shell from an 88 sing overhead, it's already past you. You don't hear the one that scores a direct hit on you, and the one that gets you with shrapnel sings in the distance and explodes in your ear. War is more of a mental strain, I believe, than physical, because the enemy is always trying his darndest to kill you, no matter if you are in a foxhole or tending to the call of nature.
Some in Allied command wanted to push on immediately while the Germans were reeling, but the senior commanders decided to wait for one final push in April, when all of the forces along the entire front could be best positioned and fully resupplied. For the rest of the month of March, the 10th was replaced by other divisions and allowed to take time away from the line in rear rest areas. Jack even had a chance to visit Florence for a couple of days, but his trip was cut short as his unit once again moved up to take its turn defending the line. Jack rode home from his foxhole.
March 17th, 1945, Italy. Dear folks, we're always grateful when we come off the line, even if it means staying in some bombed-out mountain village within sound of the guns. A chance to wash, write letters, get some sleep, and hot chow would make any place paradise right now. I've been trying to get to see Aaron, or get him to see me, but with no success so far. One of the reasons for this is that I'm always on the move. During a 2-day stay in Florence, I had the Red Cross teletype Aaron at Foggia that I'd be able to meet him at the Red Cross field office in Florence, on the assumption that I'd be in Florence until the 18th. However, I was unable to get an extension and moved out with my unit. Instead of relaxing and having a good time in the first city in Italy I've been in, I got all wrought up over not being able to contact him. As it was, I overstayed my pass some hours, came back just as my outfit was moving out, only of course I didn't know they were going to move up, because there were men still out on passes. Today, my CO called me up and told me I'm to be busted. Non-coms must set an example. There's no choice. So my next letter will read private. 3.5 years without an infraction, but it only takes one to get you. So you see, it's up to Aaron now. I can't do any more. When this outfit compiles more combat time, it will probably get a chance to go into rest camp for a decent period of time. Maybe something can be worked then.
War brings not only death and destruction, but also occasional moments of pure joy. Jack's attempt to contact his brother-in-law, Aaron Rubin, had an amazing result. Aaron, who is a radio man on a B-24 based at Foggia in the south of Italy, made a remarkable journey to see Jack.
March 19th, 1945, Italy. Dear folks, this is one letter I'm glad to be writing, and I know you'll be overjoyed to receive after you read the next line. Aaron and I met. He'll write you in detail all about it. Suffice it to say, he came the length of Italy up to this frontline town, and we made it an hour and a half do for the 3 years we didn't see each other. That's all the time there was for him, and there was no use of his getting into a mess similar to mine. Boy, I could have kissed him when I saw him coming up the path, with an old overseas cabin leather jacket on. I almost did. If it is humanly possible, you may be sure I will make every effort to get down to see him. I hope this news will help immeasurably cheer up all at home, and please continue to be that way. My love to Mom, Pop, and all the rest. God bless you all. Jack.
While Jack felt blessed to be visited on the line by his brother-in-law, Aaron, what happened next was even more remarkable.
March 31st, 1945, Italy. Dear family, funny how little things keep adding to change the big picture, as we call it in the Army. For instance, if I hadn't been busted, I wouldn't have been eligible for a pass to Rome, because an order had come out that day forbidding passes for non-coms. Then, we in the platoon drew cards for the chance to go to Rome for 5 days. Of all the guys, I won, and the winning high card was, believe it or not, a 9. Upon arriving in Rome the following morning, we were checked in at the Army Rest Center. I took in some of the sights, the rest of that afternoon and evening and the morning of the next day. That afternoon I caught a B-24, Liberator, going to a field not far from Aaron's. Within an hour and 15 minutes, I was down in the south of Italy within jeep distance of Rube, as the boys at the field call him. I called from a little town near his field, it was dark by then, made him miss a USO show, for he came down for us in a jeep, escorted us, 2 other friends of mine, right to the door of his casa. Here, I had my first shot of American whiskey in the old country, after which Aaron and those wonderful guys he bunks with broke out a feast of French fried spuds and assorted dainties from their pool of food parcels from home. It was our first chow since morning, and did we stash those eats away. Cots, plenty of blankets, candy, cigars, and best of all, a super gap fest made it at the end of a long, but oh so perfect day. We slept like logs, had a dandy breakfast, then went out with the Air Corps lads to see the way a bomb group works. We saw a mission take off, and were there to see it return, late that afternoon. The next day, loaded down with Air Force boots and equipment, we said so long, with a swell bunch of guys, vowed to return if humanly possible, and took off for Naples in a B-17 Flying Fortress. Here we got to ride in the nose of the ship. What a thrill to see it land and take off. We sat down for half an hour at Caserta, took off, and landed at Naples Airport just in time to catch a B-24 all warmed up and headed for Rome. 7,000 feet below lay the Italian landscape, looking serene and beautiful. It was all like a wonderful dream, and when I stepped from the plane, I still had wings on.
The 10th Mountain Division spent the first 10 days of April being resupplied for the coming final spring offensive. The 10th was designated to spearhead the attack through the final miles of the Apennines and out into the Po Valley. The objective was to cross the Po River and head north as far and as fast as possible towards Lake Garda at the foot of the Brenner Pass, gateway to the Alps.
April 9th, 1945. Italy. On the line. Dear family, 2 packages from you and 1 more from Lil arrived the day we pulled out of reserve. Rather than leave them behind in my squad roll, I took them along in my pack, and did they weigh me down. It was a terrific climb into the new area, and I cursed myself for a fool because I'd loaded myself down that way. Now, right here at the front, I'm glad I went to all that trouble. I've got more variety in my chow now than the generals back at Corps headquarters. It's the first time your packages went into the foxholes with me, and I can tell you I'm more grateful than ever for all the trouble you have all gone to. Thing is, I'm getting spoiled. Won't open a can of meat and beans until I have to. Last night on guard, I thought about home, the outside and inside, room by room, even the furniture, piece by piece. Looks like the old soldier's getting homesick after all these years. Especially, I thought of Mom and Pop. How much they mean to me and how few times we've seen each other in the last 3.5 years. If prayers are answered, they'll be alive and well for many years to come. That's all I ask for. All my love, Jack.
April 12th was designated D-Day. The men of the 10th, waiting to attack, could only continue to clean their weapons and try to stave off the growing fear of what was ahead. Jack rode home.
April 12th, 1945. Italy. Dear family, it's always good to see that king-size stationery and know another letter from home has arrived. Last night, 1 from you and a email from Edith. That makes 4 straight mail calls and at least a letter each time. I wonder if it's possible to explain how much they mean at times like this. Edith explained it so well in her letter. She said, "We reread your letters again and again and feel close to you each time we did it. It's exactly the same way with me. As I've said so often before, short of a visit in person with your loved ones at home, it's the next best tonic I know of. It brings cheer when you're lonely, hope when you're forlorn, courage when your nerves aren't as steady as they've got to be to keep going in this grim game. Thanks a million, Mary, and the rest of you for writing so often and at such length."
Late on April 11th, the attack was postponed until April 13th because of poor weather forecasted for the 12th. The men continued to wait. At 2 a.m. on April 13th, word reached headquarters of the 10th Mountain Division that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had died in Warm Springs, Georgia, of a stroke. His death was deeply felt by everyone, even those on the front line. Jack shared his sorrow at the loss. This would be Jack's final letter home.
Friday, April 13th, 1945. Italy. Dear family, it was just about like any other night in this shattered frontline mountaintop village. Artillery, ours and Jerry's, was active as usual. Machine guns and burp guns studded from and reached somewhere in the distance way off. At 3:20 in the morning, I started pulling my boots on, preparatory to going on guard. When I got to the outpost and took over the phone, the guy relieved said, "I just got this message from battalion. President Roosevelt died." My hour to guard passed quickly as I sat and mused at the possible world changes in present and future history, in all our lives, which might come to pass as a result of the passing of one of the greatest men of our time. His death, particularly tragic because it occurred at so crucial a point in this war, came to me as a deep personal loss, as I know it did to every man privileged to have borne arms under this greatest of commanders-in-chief. As if in tribute to the man, The sky is dull and overcast today, and there seems to be a somber stillness in the air, as if the world, even here in war-torn Italy, where death is an old, familiar story, repeated day after heartbreaking day, mourns the loss of this immortal humanitarian spirit. America, the greatest nation in the world, has lost one of her greatest sons.
The waiting finally ended as the final spring offensive began on the morning of April 14th. The objective for the 1st Battalion of the 87th Mountain Infantry was to knock the Germans out of the little town of Torre Iusi and then take control of the large hill beyond. The Germans were well dug in and throwing everything they had against the Americans. Company C, Jack's company, was constantly under artillery and mortar fire. The shells would burst in the trees overhead, sending out deadly splinters of wood, killing and wounding a number of men. The hillsides were heavily mined, and there were many casualties as the infantry tried to safely navigate through these areas while under heavy fire. The battle for the hamlet was fierce, but by nightfall, Torre Iusi had finally been cleared of German troops. The men dug yet another foxhole to try to afford themselves some protection from the continuing artillery and mortar fire, which roared in with no let-up in sight. The din of explosions, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and the cries for help of the wounded created a scene from Dante's Inferno. About 11 p.m. that night, Jack emerged from his foxhole, perhaps to go on guard duty, perhaps to check on another soldier. At that moment, a German artillery shell landed directly on top of him. Death came instantly. During the battle for Torre Iusi, Jack's friend Denny Noonan had been promoted to platoon sergeant. He later wrote home of the gut-wrenching trauma he endured.
As I have always felt it my duty to take care of my men and bring them back safely, the loss of men was a great shock to me. Wounded men are one thing, but the passing of men who you have lived with since Fort Lewis days is something else again. The cries of the wounded and the stillness of the dead finally broke my heart.
The battle continued for 18 days. The 10th Mountain Division finally drove the Germans out of the mountains and pursued them across the broad, flat Po Valley. The Allies paddled across the Po River on boats on April 23rd, as the retreating Germans had blown up the bridges. By April 27th, the Allies reached Lake Garda in the foothills of the Alps. Finally, on May 2, 1945, all remaining forces in Italy surrendered to the Allies. Victory in Europe was declared on May 8th, with the German surrender in Berlin. When the war was finally over, Denny Noonan had the opportunity to write Jack's sister Mary to express his sorrow at the loss of his close friend.
May 4th, 1945. My dear Mary, am writing you instead of writing to your mother because after all these years with Jack, I feel as though I know you. And also, maybe you might not think it wise to discuss this matter with your mother at this time, as Jack led me to believe that your mother has not been too well. Do with this letter whatever you think best. Needless to say, for many of us, this victory in Italy was saddened by the absence of many of our close friends. Those friends of ours that we had shared the toils and adventures of Army life with for 3 years. But Mary, this victory could not have been achieved without the loss of life. No road leading to any battle victory remains unstained by the blood of free men. It is regrettable that the stains of war must be made indelible across the pages of history by the blood of those we love. Those of us that remain accepted our victory here in Italy in silence, as our hearts well know that the victory really belonged to and was made possible by those that had fallen along the road to this victory. Jack's passing was a great personal loss to me, as it was the ending of the greatest Jewish-Irish friendship that ever existed. 'Twas filled with constant mirth, understanding, and admiration. And the Irishman was charged with the praying for the welfare of the partnership, while a Jewish member of the firm gave the Irishman instruction in the Catholic religion. Yes, sir, Mary, we were very close, and that's why I cried my heart out at Jack's passing. Cried so hard through the night that I was ordered to the rear, where I continued to feel my bitter loss. I returned to the outfit the next day with a greatly saddened heart, and all along this road to victory, I have received the plaudits of the liberated peoples and marveled at the beautiful country for both of us. Jack is never out of my heart nor my mind, and as we had to agree to go through hell and high water together, his memory will always remain with me. I wish that he could have seen the Po Valley, as it was something we had all been longing to see. Jack fell a few days short of the valley. Mary, Jack did not suffer. Death came to him out of the darkness, swiftly and silently, and without warning him whatsoever. Please believe me, Mary, when I say that Jack never knew it was coming, nor that it had come. Mary, I wish to share with you, your mother and father, and the entire family, your grief and sorrow. And please accept my humble prayers that I daily offer to God for your family's strength and courage and the peaceful repose of Jack's soul. Goodbye, Mary. Please, you must be brave. It's up to you to comfort your mother and father and restore happiness in the household. My love to you, Dinny.
Jack's remains were buried in an American military cemetery near Florence, Italy. Several years after the war, Solomon and Nesca Pear arranged to have their son's remains brought home to the United States. Jack was reinterred in Montefiore Cemetery on Long Island, New York. The men of the 10th Mountain Division had trained to be elite mountain troops. In Italy, skis and snowshoes were used only briefly for a few patrols soon after they arrived. The men saw combat not on skis and in the white camouflage of their training days, but in the ordinary fatigues of the regular infantry. They never fought at the high altitudes like those surrounding Camp Hale. Had all their demanding training been for nothing? Possibly. But more likely, the grueling training forced the men to learn how to contend with terrible conditions. They learned to depend on each other for their very survival, and they developed a pride in their abilities to prevail in whatever was thrown at them. Jack had several opportunities to leave the 10th, but he always chose to remain. He died with the men he knew and loved. He was 27 years old. His buddies, Denny Noonan and Stanley Lemansky, survived the war. They lived long lives, and like so many other World War II veterans, are now gone as well. Jack Pear was a bright, athletic young man who chafed at the boundaries of his life in Brooklyn. His parents had escaped the pogroms and harsh life of the shtetls of Russia and had built a new life for themselves in Brooklyn. Their business was the bedrock of their security, but Jack wanted more. He saw success moving beyond the confines of Brooklyn into a wider world, seeing and writing about all that he encountered, creating images of that world in words and pictures. Jack dreamed of being a journalist. In the end, his wartime letters and images were the expression of that dream. Jack Pear, like 400,000 other American servicemen and women, died so that the most horrific conflict in human history could be stopped. They would later be called the Greatest Generation. Jack would have chafed under the accolade. He simply did his duty, as did every man in his division. He hoped to survive the war, but he knew the odds. He always tried to comfort his family and be a loving son. Jack left a legacy in his photos and letters. He lives on in the hearts and minds of his extended family. His presence continues to be felt decades after his tragic death on an obscure Italian hillside. In the first letter of Jack's that Lily saved, a letter written on September 30th, 1942, Jack had written to his parents words that he could not have known how appropriate these words would be for those last days in April 1945.
May the near future see the end of this war, so that we can all return home. But not before we forever destroyed every last vestige of the forces of evil which are responsible for it. Then, and only then, can we return home. Return with a deeper appreciation of the families and homes and a way of living we left behind us. Because when you come right down to it, what are we fighting for if not for those very things? It's simple, and yet it's everything. And those we've left behind will be the more cherished, and the life we've left behind the more sweeter for the things we've gone through to preserve them. And most of all, dear Mom and Pop, I wish for both of you to keep well and happy. They say nothing is certain in this uncertain world of ours, but there's one thing I know you can be sure of. Your boy will never fall out of love with you. Your loving son, Jack.
I was just sad when I first started looking at this and felt like what a waste this was. To have this young man who, when you read his letters, you feel like he's a wonderful young man, just die and never have the life we all have. It's and it still in many ways is that, but I've come to feel like I know this person, and it's an odd feeling. It's not a feeling you can get from pictures, I think. Because, I mean, in pictures, they say a picture is 1,000 words. I don't see it that way anymore. Now that I'm reading these letters, the letters are so, and there are 90 plus letters here, filling out the person in a way that I feel like I absolutely know him now. It's the words, it's the thoughts, it's the personality that comes through that has now given me a new understanding of who he was. And I think he had a really interesting, wonderful life in the short time he had it. So I feel like his arc of life was a good one, and I've come to terms with that.